What's up everyone, this is Dylan Drope from Digital Native, and today we're finally going to be looking into scattering techniques using some Megascan assets. If you have not looked into Megascans yet, I highly recommend it. They have so many different textures and assets that you can download and start using in your projects. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to be using a couple of assets here. I'm going to be using these grass clumps, the tall grass here. I'm going to be using these clovers. Also going to be using these thin branches and these mossy twigs for our sticks. And then finally I'm using the mossy stones pack for the rocks. Oh, also for the ground we'll be using these dried leaves and sticks. Now, importing assets with Bridge is super easy. Just make sure that you have the C4D in your engine. And then just go ahead and click export. And you'll see it exported successfully. And we have our ground clumps here. Now, one thing you will want to note when importing assets from Bridge is that currently imported a standard texture, you will need to go in and change your render engine to Octane Render and then export the asset, and it should come in with a Octane material ready to go. And now for the basis of this tutorial, I want to get straight into the scattering. I don't want to waste any time doing these mixed materials that you will need to set up once after importing. As you see here, I have my first material and it's using the transmission since it's the diffuse, and then I duplicated the material and made it a glossy. So we have that specular, and then just mix the two together. So you're going to want to go through and do this for any of the grass materials that you import from Bridge. Now, since we're going to be using a lot of different assets in this project here, it can help to start dividing things into layers. And to do that, I'm going to start with these textures here. You can highlight all of your grass textures, right click, and add to new layer, and that will create a new layer here. I'm going to name it grass. And you can also change the color. Luckily this one was already green, so then we can also save these to a new layer by selecting them, right clicking, add to layer, grass. And once they're in a layer, you can hide the visibility with the icon here. You can also do this for our branches. I'm just going to name this one wood. And I'll change the color to brown. Select our assets here. Add to layer, wood. And this will just help with some organization in your project. Alright, so I've got all of my assets imported from Bridge. Here's the grass. Got some rocks here. Got some sticks. Going to be using these clovers. And also some taller grass. So first thing we're going to do is create a plane. Let's hide these for a moment. I'm just going to focus on these grass clumps to start off. So on the plane, let's make it a little bigger. Going to go 1500 by 1500, and I'm going to give it some more segments, 200 by 200. And then let's go ahead and add a displacer onto this plane, and we'll add a noise. Let's make it a bit bigger, go to 5000, and I'm going to change this to Naki, like using the Naki one. And then let's crank this up till we start to see something. And I think I'm just going to lower the contrast here a bit. Cool, I think that looks nice. Let's add a little variation to our ground plane here. Turning on the HDRI. I'm using a free HDRI from HDRI Haven. It's a pretty good place to get some free HDRIs. Go ahead, check it out. Okay, so let's work on scattering these grass clumps here. So I'm going to create a new octane scatter, and I'm going to put it in the same group. Let's scatter onto this plane here, so let's pipe it in. And now we're getting some scattering going on. Overall, looks a bit too clumpy, so we're going to do a couple of things to add on top of this. So now we want to add some more variation to this. We're going to start with a random effector. I'm going to put it in the grass group because we're going to use the same random effector for all of these grass scatters. I'm going to offset them just a little bit here in the X and Z. And then we're going to go into scale, make it uniform, and go -1. Also with the rotation, we're going to pipe this one up to 1,000. And then let's add our random effector into our scatter, and we'll start to see a difference right away. Overall, it looks really patchy right now. So we can change that by just adding some more. I'm going to add a 0 here, and now already this looks pretty good. Get a nice distribution of grass here. And looking down from the top view, we've eliminated all of that patchiness. But we're really not looking for that much grass, so I'm going to reduce it for now. And next thing we want to add is a shader. And this shader effector is going to be the driving force for a lot of our scattering here. We're going to be spending most of our time in the shader effector. And this shader effector is going to help us kind of weave that grass in and out of certain spots. So first thing we want to do in the shader, let's change the scale to -1, same as the random. And then let's go into shading and add a noise. Gonna use the same layout I did for the floor, why not? And this brightness and contrast sliders will be how you can greater determine where these things are kind of spreading out. Let's make this count up to 3,000. So now the shader defector is causing it to clump up in certain spaces and be really small in others, which helps with the variation in this grass. If I play with the brightness some, you'll see it gets bigger, and we lose a lot of those spaces where it was no grass. So the brightness and contrast sliders are going to be your best friend in creating more variation within your scatter. And this is all determined by the noise we used within the shader. So that looks pretty good. Let's move on to the clovers. I'm just going to copy the shader and our octane scatter and put it into the clover group. So there we go. We've just replaced it. We'll need to replace the shader with this new one. So let's make this a bit less. I'm going to use 1,000 for now, using the same random effector as before. And it looks a bit weird, so let's add our ground texture in. Using this dried leaves texture, Just going to quickly up the repetitions. Gives it a nice effect because we have the living grass atop, and then we have some dead stuff that has fallen down over time. That seems to look good. So let's turn our clovers back on. And now that's looking a bit more natural. So let's play with this shader some. Going to give it a new seed. And we'll change the seed on the scatter. Now you'll see as we play with this brightness and contrast, things will begin to change some. So I'm going to change the seed around in the shader. Give us some different scattering results. And I think that looks pretty good. So let's move on to the tall grass. I'm going to copy the shader and scatter into the tall grass and delete the older ones. And then we'll put the tall grass in the new scatter. Same as before, let's replace the shader with our new one, and we should be good to go. So change the seed on both of these. Now we're getting some different patterns. And using this tall grass is nice because it's going to allow this grass to kind of poke out the tops of our clumpy grass once that's in as well. Let's turn these other ones on and see what we're getting for this grass scatter. Now that we've got all three together. And you'll notice it's looking a lot nicer than that first original grass scatter we did. We're getting some more variation in here. I do think the clovers could be a bit more. That's looking better. And then I do think this grass might be a little too big, so we can go into the scale of our octane scatter and just change these here. I'm going to do 0.7. And there we go. Now the clovers are kind of peeking through the grass a bit better here. Okay, so that's looking pretty nice. If we view the top-down angle here, you can see we've eliminated all of that clumpiness we were getting in the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the grass for now so we can move on to the next step. And I'm going to copy the shader, random, and scatter into our branches here. Okay, so let's start off with these thin branches. I'll just put the shader and scatter in there. And then we'll put the branches into the new scatter. Once again, we'll replace the shader effector with our new one. Also going to replace the random effector since we're in the branches now. And we want to change some settings in this random effector. Adding some more degrees to these here will allow them to kind of peek out of the ground. Without it, they'd be scattering flat on the ground. Let's turn this off so we can see the sticks a bit better. As you can see with those subtle bumps in the random, each twig kind of has some variation. It might be sticking out of the ground. This is what it would look like flat. So we don't want that. 30 should be enough. All up to you, of course. Cool, I think that's already looking pretty nice. Let's just play with the count a little bit. I'm gonna up it to 2000. And I'll play with the seed for the scatter and the shader. Cool, I am liking what that is looking like. So let's move on to the next set of twigs here. I'm going to delete my branches and let's bring in the twigs. Going to hide our other branches so we can see these. I got a lot of little wood chips here, which are nice. Ground texture I'm currently using already has wood chips kind of in it, but this will add just an extra level of detail. So I'm actually going to duplicate this random effector and place it in the twigs separately. I'm going to reduce the amount that they are kind of poking up through the ground for this one. Here we go, now they're a little more flush. Going to increase the count, 3000. Play with the seed once again. Oops, and we need to replace the shader. There we go. I'm going to play with this a bit. We're getting some blank areas, so reducing the brightness will kind of fill those areas up. Cool, so this is what it looks like with the branches and the twigs in place. This is going to be a very minor detail. You're probably not going to see much of this through the grass, but just adds another layer to this scatter. I'm going to put my ground plane back on. Cool, and you won't notice much of a difference, but the branches are there. You will see them probably in higher quality renders. So let's move on. We'll start with the rocks here. I'm going to copy the random, shader, and scatter into here. Same as before, we're going to be replacing these. And boom, now we got a lot of rocks scattered around. Let's replace the random and the shader. Now it looks like we have maybe too many rocks. I'm going to lower this to 1500. Play with the seeds once again. And changing this brightness and contrast to get some smaller rocks. Adding some more rotation to these rocks here. Now it's looking pretty good. Probably going to play with the seed some. Now, since we only enabled the scale in the shader, it's only going to affect the size of the rocks. It's not going to affect the placement. So I'll just keep playing with the seed here until I find a nice scatter like this. This looks pretty good. I'm going to zoom out. Nice, we're getting some nice rocks scattered throughout the plane now. Alright, so let's go ahead and start turning everything on now. Got our rocks some branches somewhere in there. And lastly, we'll apply our ground terrain one more time. Cool, this is looking really nice. Gonna quickly save before Octane craps out on us. And I kind of messed up when doing this tutorial. I left the max samples at a value of 10. So it's not really going to get much more detail than you're seeing now. Whoops. But you get the picture. So I do think that some of these taller grass clumps are looking a little weird. Gonna go into the scatter here. Actually, I'm gonna go into the shader. Play with the contrast and brightness some. Turning up the brightness made them go away, so I'm dialing it back until they start to come in a little smaller than they were before. And I'm going to play with the seed. Alright, that's looking good. I'll turn my main grass back on. Sweet. Got some nice variation here in our scatter. Didn't take too long to set up since we used a lot of the same process throughout. But yeah, that'll about sum it up for the scattering portion of this tutorial. I like to add a tree to this scene since we're just using a plane. I like to do this to just add some shadows into the scene, make it seem like there are some trees around this grassy knoll. I'm going to pop into my perspective view. Just using a tree from Forester here. I mean, since we're not going to see the tree, you can use anything you like. You can not even use a tree, use something else and get some shadows. I'm going to move that off to the side and change the tree. I'm just going to choose this Aralia tree. Give it some leaves. There we go. So now we're getting some shadows onto our view here. Gonna try and, let's see, make the trunk a bit taller here. Cool, and that is working. It's kind of breaking the tree a little bit, but we're not gonna see it, so who cares? And as you can see, we're getting some nice shadows. I'm going to move this into the top right corner. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to move this one into the bottom left kind of side. Cool, there we go. We're getting a nice light streak through the middle here. And turning on the scatter again. Sweet. That looks really nice. Yeah, I hope you guys got something from this tutorial. It's what I like to use when scattering Megascan assets. And there's honestly so much you can do with the massive inventory of assets that they have created over the years. Starting with a simple scene here. Plan on doing a lot of tutorials like this, but thought I'd start off with the ground first before we move on to some bigger scenes. So yeah, hopefully you guys got something out of this tutorial. And Yeah, leave a comment if you guys have any suggestions on things you'd like to see. Love hearing what you guys have to say. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this tutorial on some scattering techniques. If you guys haven't yet, go check out our store. We got some free stuff in there. That's it. I'll see you next time. Peace.